I'm John Batchelor. Larry Kudlow, CNBC and Kudlow Radio, is here with me in studio, and it's a great pleasure, Larry, to talk about this next subject because it's a total surprise. No one at Politico, no one at BuzzFeed, no one at all at Vox and all the wonderful sites I read, especially 538, I mentioned to you, Mr. Silver, was telling me to watch Virginia. Virginia, I thought that was a blue state. I thought it was owned completely by the federal government. We're joined now by Veronique Duregis, who is at the Mercatus Center, and she has things to say about what the Republicans need to do in the new year in order for this to be a new Senate, if that's the way it's going. But she's also a Virginian, a person who watches the Northern Virginia suburbs because she lives there. Veronique, can you hear screaming outside right now? Because the race is that close. Mr. Gillespie's winning by 20,000, and we're waiting for Northern Virginia results to come in. Good evening to you.
Good evening to you. It is a surprise, but as I've said, it's the second big surprise that we have. So maybe we shouldn't be that surprised this year. If you remember, the Cuccinelli McAuliffe race was also, like everyone called it, a surprise. The Cantor, the Brad victory in June was also like a big surprise. So I guess maybe pollsters need to revamp their models about Virginia. Maybe that's what the lesson is here.
Another lesson, possibly, Veronique, is that political consultants need to change their attitude about candidates running on issues. Ed Gillespie has run a brilliant issues campaign across the board. You know, he was one of the authors of The Contract with America many years ago as a Dick Armey lieutenant. Ed Gillespie has shown them what they should have done nationally, if you ask me. I agree. And as I was telling you during the break, this morning when I was driving to work, I noticed his signs, and I had seen them before, but they were brilliant because all they said is, Ed Gillespie for economic growth. And this is exactly in this current economic environment where things on paper seems to be recovering, getting better a little bit, but people feel that things are just not right. I mean, it doesn't feel that we've recovered. This is a brilliant slogan. And he ran on actually the important message. What are we going to do? And it's an issue campaign, as you said. What are you going to do to put Virginia and the country back on its feet? And he talked about tax reform. He talked about energy-related issues. He talked about deregulation. He talked about the broken banking system. I mean, Veronique, it annoyed me. I spent a lot of time lobbying senators to try to get something like this, and I failed. One or two big shots stopped it out. I just think there's a lesson here. If you want the public and the country to give you political control of the country, Veronique, don't you have to tell them what you will do with that?
I agree. I mean, I completely agree with you, but my understanding, and I don't follow politics closely, I follow policy. And I've gone and looked at the GOP running for the Senate this time around and looked at their program, and none of them actually ran on anything but vague promises without exactly telling you what government spending they're going to cut, what kind of tax reform they will implement, and their message was full of contradiction. And Gillespie didn't do that. He ran an issue campaign with a program, and he was more open about this than others.
I mentioned a couple of details here. First of all, the Washington Post and the New York Times, Larry, are putting up that Shaheena's won New Hampshire. We see that AP has not yet called it. So there seems to be some hesitation there. It's not overwhelming for New Hampshire. The Tillis-Hagan race is not called at this point. Pryor has lost in Arkansas, and Capito has won in West Virginia. So that's a +2. The seat in New Hampshire is a Democratic seat. So the fact that Mr. Brown may have lost, and I note that the New York Times and Washington Post is going with that, is not profound. We're focusing on Virginia because, Larry, all the reporters in Washington, whom I depend upon for being inside guys to attend that party with the president, right? They live in Northern Virginia. How did they not see the lawn signs or the lack of them? Veronique, is Mr. Warner one of those candidates who everybody loves who doesn't live in Virginia, and in Virginia there's no opinion of him?
Well, I think, like from what I've heard and I read, I think people are really disillusioned, and I'm curious to see. I think I'm curious to see how many people went to the polls, and whether that's kind of one of the big explanation. But also, if you remember, Ed Gillespie ran an ad once or twice about the scandal that Warner was involved in, because, as you know, he wanted to, McAuliffe wants to expand Medicaid, so he needed as many lawmakers on his side, so senator in particular, and lawmaker to expand Medicaid, and as a result, there's an issue of nepotism that took on.
Veronique, we want to get an update from Francis Rose. Francis, have you got any numbers from Virginia? We have about 15 seconds.
The numbers that are coming in pretty quickly for Virginia, because the Northern Virginia precincts are starting to submit results, John. But right now, the way that it looks as they pile one on top of the other is that right now the lead is holding for Ed Gillespie over Senator
Francis
Warner.
Rose at WMAL, Veronique de Regie in Virginia at the Mercatus Center, Larry Kudlow, CNBC. I'm John Batchelor.